Welcome to GBIRL, the podcast looking at the real business world of esports, gaming, and streaming with the people and personalities behind it all. Here is your host, Bill the Conqueror.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. And people think that they want certain jobs in the gaming industry. I have friends who want to be community managers, and people who want to manage a major Discord for a video game. And I'm like, well, you know what? Be careful what you wish for, because I've always said being a community manager, social media manager is the job you think you want until you actually have to do it, because when the world crashes down around gamers, you're usually the first person that they turn to. So how do you handle crisis? How do you function when it feels like the world is crashing down around you? And more importantly, how do you separate from, how do you work out the threshold where you get messages from gamers and some of them might be important and some of them are just the standard noise, people yelling at you because they can? How do you know that line? How do you understand that? How do you deal with it? And more importantly, how do you turn yourself off at night? Because people game 24/7, but you can't be awake 24/7. So how do you deal with that? And I am fortunate enough to have an individual with me today on the podcast. He is the former director of communications for Respawn. He has moved on to be the marketing director from Odyssey Interactive, has a ton of industry experience, spent some time at Riot doing all the good things, and I am lucky enough to have him with me today on the podcast. Ryan Rigney. Ryan, I shot my shot. You said yes. You came on the podcast. Thank you for making time for me today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Bill.
All right. So for those who might not be fully aware of who you are, and that's fair, because some people don't play Apex. Some people don't play League. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. So just as a background into what you've done so far in the industry, what has brought you to this point, I'll go through that real quick.
Sure. I used to be a journalist. I used to write for magazines, kind of starting with smaller ones. I mean, most of these don't even exist today. So the Game Pro magazine was the first one I wrote for.
Right.
I did that for a number of years. I think probably 7-8 years or so.
Wow.
Just kind of freelancing. Really thought that's what I wanted to do. Career-wise, until I slowly realized that, this industry is crumbling to the ground while I'm still in it.
Yep.
So I had gotten really lucky and had some great mentors. Folks at Wired, at Edge, really good editors. So it was a great experience that I really got a lot out of, but it wasn't going to lead to like a full-time position anywhere. So around 2014, maybe, I think I moved to Los Angeles and started looking for video game industry jobs there. Worked at a startup for about a year. That was fun. Before taking a job as a writer with Riot Games. And that was sort of how I got into, being a person that communicates on behalf of game companies.
Right.
Sort of the Riot back then even was Riot is still a pretty wild place. Now it's fun to work. It's like very creative, right? But back then it was literally like, just work on whatever interests you. So I kept being drawn to opportunities that would let me help game developers talk to people on the internet, because it seemed like something that a lot of people struggled with. And I had been kind of publicly communicating in one way or another by writing for a long time. So it was just kind of clicking, and I wound up moving into communications, eventually became the communications lead on League of Legends, left to lead comms on PUBG, came back to lead comms for League, the franchise, including like the spinoff games, Wild Rift and Teamfight Tactics, and did that for a while, and then a little over a year ago went to Respawn, and then most recently kind of moved out of comms into marketing at Odyssey Interactive. So that's kind of the high level overview of my career.
Right.
Yeah, I've been lucky to work at some really great companies.
Yes, yes, and each is this. This is something that I've always wondered for somebody like you in your position when you move from major company to major company, and then even even within the company itself, like you said, when you were working for Riot, you were not only handling communications for the main game, but also the spin-offs like Team Fight Tactics and Wild Rift. So
Mhm.
so what is it? So what am I trying to say here? I'm certain that those communities, whether you're talking League or Apex, are vastly different communities because you have different games or different styles of games. Have you had to adjust your style, adjust your tone, or the ways you communicate because of the communities?
Yeah, two different ways. So one is the league franchise role was a huge shift because it was like a manager position. So really the goal was like how do you like help other people kind of grow in their own way and take command and kind of use their own voice to lead communications on these games. So I was managing the team across, Wild Rift, Team Fight Tactics,
Right,
and working with people who are now the leads on those games, right? So
right.
that was a huge shift just as it was like, I have a very particular style and voice.
Okay.
And not that doesn't it only works because it's authentic to me, I think.
Okay.
And
Okay.
you have to be authentic if you're gonna do if you're gonna come out there and say say y'all, and I mean I'm from Mississippi, and kind of just lay it out there real straight, and
Right.
talk in a very casual way. It has to be true to what, where you are, where you're from and who you are, right? So that was a different challenge in that it was like working with people to kind of, and almost also learning too, how do these principles apply when channeled to a different person. So that was pretty cool. And then to answer your question about like the difference in audience, like I think Apex is remarkably similar to the League audience, at
Oh.
least in terms of the ones that you're talking to online, right?
Okay.
Like
Okay.
the overall audience is overlapping but separate, big concentric circles. But the part that you're talking to online is the most overlapping part, which is the heavily engaged, super
Oh,
competitive,
okay.
probably plays on PC, part of the player base. And Apex is like, it's weird because Apex is sometimes the conversations that almost sound the same because it's still like a free to play,
Mm-hmm.
like arena game with a bunch of characters with kits that get balanced. Like there's a number of kind of striking similarities between Apex and League. The main difference being that a huge portion of the community is on console, but they've, I think, started to sound and pick up the culture of like hardcore PC gaming over time as well. So I would say it was mostly similar, actually, going from League to Apex. Kind of more so even than I thought.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, and so it's really interesting that you say that because of how people interact with each game and how the game style is played. So as far as your time at Riot, is there a difference in the community between the main League core audience and the people who play the a mobile side like a Wild Rift?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean League of Legends in particular is a game that came out in 2009. So the type of audience there, some of those people have been playing for many years, right? So I think there's some obvious differences. Like there's more salty veteran types in the League PC audience,
Sure.
and you see more and more of the Apex players, becoming the salty veteran over time.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and I think that is a 10-year game too. So I think that they'll be, 7 years from now, they'll look a lot like League of Legends, even more than they already do.
Right. Right.
And mobile is very different, man. Mobile's like, it's not just younger, but it's also like much more global. It's a lot more diverse. Like it's people from all over, and PC really skews not exclusively, but heavily EU, North America.
Okay.
A little bit of Brazil, LATAM, certainly Korea, China,
Right.
but mobile is everywhere. So there's definitely some like noticeable differences in the types of conversations that people have and kind of their attitude toward games in particular too.
Okay, so when you say there are differences, is it a cultural thing, or because of the newness of mobile gaming, is it more of an of an education thing?
Well, whenever you encounter mobile players, like they're extremely savvy about mobile games, right? Like they're
Okay,
like
okay, got it.
they know more than you do about mobile games, right? But they might not have the same context and the same expectations that like a PC player would have. A lot of like the best free to play games on PC kind of feel like their roots are in previous PC games, right? Like live service on PC kind of just became sort of like existing PC games that were just updated much more often, right? And I
Okay,
think the way that mobile has always operated is that it's always kind of in live service from the start.
okay,
So expectations about how games work, like people will compare Apex to like a Call of Duty game that costs $60 or a Battlefield game that costs $60, right? Like
wow,
even though they're using totally different business models, like
right,
I think everything on PC is kind of merging towards live service, but I don't know. I guess I'm talking in vague terms right now, but
right,
there's a lack of like history. Like mobile isn't burdened by the history of all these games, right? Like there's kind of like
okay,
they're comparing you to the most recent mobile games and how those work, and like the standard is against those. So like when a game like that really raises the bar, in my opinion, like Wild Rift did comes out, that's kind of the standard that people compare you to. Or there's lots of other great mobile games that I think are the standard setters right now, like Brawl Stars,
mm-hmm.
so a lot of Supercell games. Like people love these games, they play them, and when they find a new one, they're not thinking in terms of like, oh, is this like StarCraft 2? They're thinking in like terms of mobile. So that kind of results in like different types of conversations when they're making comparison points.
It's really interesting that you bring that up because there are Call of Duty players that still refer to Black Ops 2. They still talk about Black Ops 2.
Yeah.
And that was like forever ago. Like forever. And you're like, Black Ops 2 is like 9 games ago. Why? Oh, Black Ops 2 was this. But then you talk about the mobile side, and they basically have a shorter history. So when mobile gamers reference other mobile games and how they were good and bad, yeah, it's definitely a different conversation. So I totally see what you're saying there. Is that the overall history of mobile games is insanely shorter than the first live service game StarCraft 2 back in 2012.
Yeah.
Like you're like 10 years ago. That's like forever in the gaming world, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so I think that, and we talked about this before we went live, but I think what is always fascinating to me, buddy in your position, is that you don't ever know what's going to happen with the game at any given time. You're in a very a reactive role. You are the sort of front facing person of the game, even though you don't. When it comes to the game itself, you don't write a single line of code. You don't do any. So like when people scream at you about some bug or glitch, you're like, I'll pass it on to the team. That's all I can do. Sort of. I don't actually type code. I think it's interesting in your job to have the filter, have the skills to be able to handle crisis, and to even know what a crisis is, because you will always have people sending you messages. Hey, this is happening. Hey, this is happening. or this is broken, fix this, and you're like, no, it's actually not, but okay. So I guess so let's start at the point where you and your team, you're always being sent messages of some sort or another. So how do you determine what is an actual issue versus the average random gamer who's upset because something happened? Maybe it was a server lag, maybe God forbid, maybe they just got outplayed, go figure, right? Maybe they just got outplayed and they think that there's something wrong with the game. So talk to me about how you determine what could actually be something happening versus some player just being salty with you.
Yeah. Well, there's so many venues now for like players that talk to each other and kind of to yell at devs on the internet that you kind of a
Right.
lot of it is like you just can stand back and see it all in its grandeur, its mass form.
Right.
Reddit like kind of good for that, right? Because if there's something really going wrong that's like happening to a lot of people, you will hear about it. It's there will be 10,000 voices yelling. If
Right.
there's like only one or two, sometimes you go, okay, tell me more about that, right? Like, what is it? Sometimes once you've been on a game long enough, you can start to kind of develop the ability to say, that just sounds like you had a network connection or, issue or whatever, and just
Right.
frankly not respond to. There's not enough hours in the day to respond to all those.
Right.
So like, honestly, a lot of the job is you're helping the dev team talk to people on the internet because you want the dev team to understand how players are playing their game, and hopefully as a result of understanding that and their experience, make the game better, right? Like that's the ultimate value of it, is that
Right.
like you're all working to make something that people like to play,
Right.
and a comms person is really just there to help out with that. So devs do get jaded because they get so much thrown at them, because every single person thinks they're doing a public service when they get feedback on the internet.
Right.
Even though depending on their tone, they might be or they might not be. Uh, so a lot of it is cutting through the noise. A lot of times, even when there is a lot of noise, it's really hard to tell what is actually the problem, because players are so forgive me, internet, but inarticulate about the way they express it. They're just kind of yelling and saying this thing is shit or whatever. And you're like, but what, why, what part of it? And
Right.
they rarely get into specifics, right? They kind of just, and that's part of it is the way that our current like algorithmically driven social media works, is that like you have to
Right.
have a very simple message for it to get boosted very, very far.
Right.
Anyway, so a lot of the job is kind of going in there. The thing that I like to do is, that I've done a lot in the past on Apex or League, is like go into the war zone, say it's a Reddit thread or whatever, where like a bunch of people are mad, and just start asking questions to be like,
Right.
to clarify, right? Like, is it this? Or, is this what we're talking about? Here's something a dev wants to know. We're thinking about doing this, right? And then slowly you kind of develop a sense. The goal there is to develop a sense of what would it take to fix things for people, right?
Right.
And then I can take that back to the dev team and help them understand. So that's kind of generally the process. For a lot of like smaller bugs, you should have like a standardized approach to it, right? So like we have a lot of times we'll work with a community that sets up like a standard bug reporting thread, or certainly like in-game tools to report bugs, and that should be like integrated into like a QA like dev workflow, right?
Right.
I think in a perfect world, you are catching most things through that process, and then fix them through the normal patch cycle. But there's always, like you said, sometimes you have to be reactive, and there's something really wrong happening, something going really wrong, and that's when that's when that kind of go out on the internet and talk to people approach becomes more valuable.
Well, see, and I think this is something that a lot of gamers don't fully understand, is people who make games and people who play games speak two inherently different languages. They use different words and they use different terms, and different phrases mean something to a gamer and they mean something completely opposite to a dev, and standing in the middle of that is you. Standing in the middle of that is, you're basically a translator between the devs and the community and the community and the devs. And so when when a dev gives you gives you a technical explanation that lasts 10 minutes to fix one bug, you turn around to the community and goes, just let you know that this bug is fixed and we did this. And it takes you 3 seconds to translate a 10-minute conversation. And I don't think that gamers grasp that, is that there's so much happening on their end with the user interface and the server on the back end, and there's all this data moving back and forth, and they're like, I press the WASD keys and I shoot things. And you're like, okay, it's like slightly more complex than that. And I don't think that I try really hard to not talk down to people like that. It's like, look, there's a lot of technical stuff going on in these games, and people say, just fix the bug. Fixing the bug involves a long process that if I tried to explain it to you, I'd lose you in the first 10 seconds. And so
right.
Trying to explain, how you copy the game to your PC and you fix the bug, then you have to reintegrate that thread back in the main game. But before you do that, you have to test it against X, Y, and Z. And then even after you do that, even after you merge it back in, you think it works, it might break something else that you didn't even think about was going to happen. And so I think that there's a major communication gap between gamers and devs where it's definitely better than it used to be, but there are some gamers that don't understand that it might take 3 hours of one person doing work to fix one bug. And if there are 12 bugs that are, small bugs in a game, you tell me you're going to spend 36 hours to fix those 12 bugs when you have other issues going on, right?
Yeah, I think like, it's almost never worth it to explain the technical details to folks, unless it's an issue that is a long, ongoing issue that affects everyone. So, on Apex, we had our lead network engineer do a really deep dive blog into how we think about and approach network issues.
Right.
And that was pretty valuable. Some people just decided not to take anything away from it, but a lot of people who read it were like, okay, they understood the value in the company taking its position, expressing its position, right? Because before it was just unclear, how does Respawn even think about these things?
Right.
And so we took some hard stances on how do we think about, tick rate and that sort of thing. So in those cases, it's valuable. Most of the time, it's not worth it. What people really want to know is, my shooty pew pew is broken. When will you fix my shooty pew pew?
Exactly.
So you tell them the truth, whatever you can find out, and a lot of times there's not, there's no way it's not like devs would have a little meter that fills up. It's bug fix progress that goes to 100 and then ding, they're done. They don't know. They're going to work on it and then tell you when it's fixed, right? So I think it's hey, we're aware of it. We're prioritizing it. We're going to try to get it in. We believe we can get it in by next patch. You might say something like that.
Right.
You might not know that you can get in for next patch. So you just say we're aware of it and prioritizing it, right?
Right.
A lot of times, it's really interesting. A lot of times the bug itself is fairly fast to fix, right? Oops, there's this one line of code. 10 seconds to input the keystrokes to change that code, right?
Right.
But then a much, much longer process for actually getting that change through QA, through your publishing pipeline, through third parties. It's not easy to ship a change. You can't just ship a change to PlayStation, Xbox. There's a whole verification process.
Right.
There's a bunch of barriers in between that have nothing to do with fixing the bug and everything to do with getting the bug fixed to you. One of the toughest things is especially when you're multi-platform, you will very often have a 4, 5, 7 day delay between having the bug fixed and being able to put the bug fix out live. So that, I would say, is the hardest thing to communicate to people. And one thing I will say, though, is it's always good strategy to arm your advocates so that they can, explain to others for you. So it is worth occasionally coming out and saying, listen, this is how our bug pipeline, process works, right?
Right.
Like, hopefully not in the heat of the moment, hopefully after things have calmed down, because people don't care in the heat of the moment. They just
Yep.
want to know when their thing is going to be fixed. But I do think it's worth it to go out there and kind of actually tell people, like, probably a lot of people would be interested to know that about how long it takes to ship a bug.
Yep.
On certain platforms. Sorry, ship a bug fix. It's very easy and quick to ship a bug. Uh, yeah. So I think a lot of people would be interested to know that. And then they are quite likely to share that information with someone else who doesn't know in
Right.
the future, right? So they're your advocates in that scenario. Um, yeah, so it is difficult. There's a huge information gap,
Right.
and a lot of people don't care about learning that information. They just want to know when it's fixed. But there are people out there who do care and who will, kind of advocate for you in the future and explain things for you in the future if you find the right time to explain it.
Okay, so I want to get into the nuts and bolts of handling crisis, and it's been in the news, several high-level hacks, Titanfall, Apex Legends. Now, let's preface this whole conversation with this statement. I'm not here to relitigate the past. We're not going to walk through details and start, what about this? That's not what we're doing. I don't want to relitigate the past. I don't want you to feel like you have to put relationships in jeopardy. That part of me does not care. But what I do care about is this: how do you manage the crisis, and how do you effectively communicate in a relatively short period of time? Because you have multiple stakeholders. You not only have the devs and the audience, you have the executives. You have the executives above you that are like, "Hey, what's going on? Hey, what's going on? What is what?" And that could actually be more pressure on you. I'm not 100% sure, but that could actually be more pressure on you than 400,000 random gamers going fix game. So I guess when those events happen, start with, what's the first thing that you do when you see something that, you obviously know, okay, we got an issue. We got something. We definitely have a thing, a hack, a major bug, whatever that means. What's your first few steps in terms of, okay, I got to know this. I got to know this. I got to do this. I got to talk to this person. I got to handle this problem. And then I have to go do this. So walk me through that process.
Yeah, I think for any crisis, you're gonna have to go through a flow to get like a communication out there, like an approval process. You are almost, unless you are like the one person that works in the game, you are almost certainly not going to have a one-step process where you just say,
Right.
"Here's what I think is happening," which would be ideal and the fastest way to go about it, right?
Right.
Um, what you first have to do is go and have an agreement and an understanding between communications and the dev team of what's happening. So it's good to have a process in place where you can do that really quickly.
Right.
I will say one of the best processes I've ever worked in was at Respawn.
Okay.
It's a guy who's unfortunately no longer there, but Chen Chong is his name, and he was, a live ops producer
Okay.
who was sort of an information bottleneck in a good way. Like everything would flow up through him and down through him,
Right.
and it was very clear you could go to him and find out what's happening,
Okay.
or agree. I would articulate. I would say, if I were to say this, would that accurately capture it? Right?
There
And
you go.
say yes, or yes, but you missed this nuance, or no, it should be more like this, right?
Okay.
And then we, rewrite. Here's what I'm going to say. If Chen says that's cool, we're good to go, right? Like that. So that was an amazing process. A lot of times at other game studios, I don't know if they ever get to something like that because there's so many different product owners that they would then have to get. They probably have a Google Doc with like 12 people dropping comments and suggestions and rewrites in.
Yep.
That's a mess, right? I think a really good process is like there are very clear owners who are able to speak to what is happening and also have some, relatively strong sense of how they would articulate that publicly. This also becomes a lot easier if you have a policy of being, as transparent as possible, because then you can just say, well, how are we expressing it internally? what if we just said that externally? That's the easiest way to figure out how to communicate. Like if that's your style of, oh shit, this thing broke, and we made this change and it caused this thing to break. If you're able to speak to each other clearly internally, you can use that as a baseline to start expressing externally. Then, depending on the size and scale of your organization, you have some additional number of steps. For a privately held company, it's a smaller series of steps. It's probably, depending on the severity of things, looping in people who are like accountable for the thing you're working on. So, heads of the product team, heads of the marketing team, just making sure they're aware. And then you hit publish, hopefully, and you let your audience know what's going on. For a publicly traded company, it gets more complicated. There might be impact on the stock price, and so there's like a lot of considerations for that. There's like most companies that are publicly traded have an entire team that's built around investor relations. It depends on how many like different verticals in a company your thing is impacting.
Right.
You don't want to start talking about something that impacts something that someone else works on without them or their accountable lead being involved.
Right.
So it can get pretty complicated pretty fast. I've worked at companies of all scales and sizes. PUBG Corporation, the North American branch was like under 20 people at one point when I was there. But it was tied to like a 300-person studio that was a subsidiary of a Korean internet company.
Right.
Riot Games was like, when I got there, like a 2,000-person company, probably closer to 3,000 now. I'm not quite sure.
Right.
EA is like somewhere over 10,000, right? And there's, and it's completely Riot and EA are both completely global. Oh God, don't even get me. You have to, think about regional implications. That's the other thing too. You might not just be having an English problem. This might be like a multi-language thing. So it really depends. I think the important thing to know for people is that like, when companies are bigger, everything is working against them to be very clear, to communicate clearly in a timely manner. It becomes so difficult, and the only way to avoid that difficulty is if they have like really well established processes, to help them get around that. And I feel like I've been pretty lucky in my time in the industry. Like,
right. I
have always had leads that understood the importance of that and that, let me move fast and be honest and transparent on things. So it has been more challenging at the larger places I've worked, but for reasons that make sense, right?
Right.
Just because of complexity. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It totally does, because I don't think people fully understand what it means for communication as your company grows. When you add in layers of authority, like you said, when you have the team leads, when you have the various product managers, when you have to deal with investors. So there's one person in the company, one person that all the investors call. Hey, I heard this is happening. What do you know? I don't know anything yet. And so not only are you managing multiple channels, the devs, the team leads, your bosses, community relations, and investor relations, you have to basically speak a different language to each person. And what I mean by that is what you say to the investor relations person is not going to be the same as when you talk to your dev team lead. Those are two different conversations with two different languages, and I don't know that people understand that. Plus, it's hard to manage closeness at scale. So when you go from 10 to 100 to 1,000, it makes that communication process longer and more difficult by orders of a magnitude that a lot of people don't get. So you, as that kind of central hub person, you not only have to manage that, but like you said, you're talking to people in different languages. You're talking to people who speak Korean, Japanese, Chinese, maybe Spanish, Portuguese, French. I mean, you're literally communicating in dozens of languages, and what you think sounds good in English makes sound completely wrong in Korean, and you have to hope that your person who sends it out in Korean understands that, right?
Right. Yeah. A lot of studios now operate with, they'll have a contract partner, right, that handles localization. It's shockingly easy to get stuff localized, like because of how well developed the infrastructure is.
Good.
For every place I've ever worked, there's a ticket system.
Okay.
You drop a Google Doc into that ticket. You tick a box that says translate into these 23 languages.
Wow.
And then you say, reach out to me with questions, and then you will hear from someone, in the Middle East or in Taiwan or like wherever, right, where they're saying, I have a question about this, and it'll be like some weird idiom you use that like only makes sense to like Americans in particular,
right?
And then you just kind of sort through it, and Google Doc comments is really shockingly easy, and a lot of times 3 days turnaround. You can get something really localized. Now, it doesn't work so well for crisis communications.
Right.
But honestly, the way around it is you don't use it for crisis communications. What you do is you get your message out in English, because it's a global language. And you internally, to people who have connections to regions where it might also be impacting. Like, say you have an issue that might be specifically impacting Japan.
Right.
You then go directly to your Japan contact and say, here is the issue. Here's the message we're going to put out. Do what you have to help your segment of the player base understand. But fact is, probably the Japanese player base is going to see it on Twitter in English, and it will get translated for them anyway, like super, super quickly. It's becoming less of a barrier over time, the language thing. I thought it was interesting what you said about different people in the organization are speaking different language as well.
Yeah.
It is true. It's definitely true.
Yeah.
They also have different questions and concerns. Yeah. But I will say that the language issue becomes less of a problem when you have like broad, kind of like a really strong culture, like broad cultural alignment.
Right.
So like, at EA, I'll give an example. There is an investor relations guy whose name I won't say, but who's like a very legit gamer, and he would always shock me. Like he's like a high level, like a guy who deals with like investors, right?
Right.
And so you kind of expect someone like that to be like a bit of a suit. Like I remember one time I sent out the patch notes for something, and he was like, hey, I think you might have had a typo on the P2020 damage per bullet change. You said it's this, but it probably makes more sense as this. And I was like, dude, you're awesome. Like, it would normally take a dev to catch something like that. And in this case, all the devs had missed it except for the, investor relations guy, because he plays the game.
Wow.
And he understands the like underlying numbers on things. So in those cases, I can speak the same language to him as I can to anybody else, and he will on his own translate it into investor relations speak.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
a lot of people, most people that work in the games industry love games, and you're able to like kind of align around that, and like you have that shared passion. But it's true. People, different parts of the org have different concerns and different questions, and probably have different language to, discuss those too. So it is an additional layer of challenge on things.
Okay, so now let's get a personal for a minute, because in the midst of all this, we have people, we have human beings with lives, families, and dreams and desires. So there's you in the middle of this, and you're basic. I'm sure you basically at some points when you're handling problems and trying to figure out what's actually worth talking about online, and what's like, it's just more people screaming at me for no reason. So when it comes to these crises, and you are like knee deep in it and trying to wade through it and figure stuff out, how in the world do you stay sane? How do you not take things personally? Because I guarantee you have had horrible DMs sent to you. People when their game is broken, they are horrible creatures sometimes. So when you're in the midst of all this and you're like, I love my job. I love my job. I love my job so much. Please, someone confirm that I love my job. Sort of a concept. Whoa, 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 whoa. What do you do? What do you do to stay sane?
I do have an interesting approach to this that not everyone should use.
Okay.
The first part is stuff that's kind of more universally applicable, which is like you do have to remind yourself that it's not about you. Even if people are responding to something you said, it's still not really about you. It's more about them and their experience, which is informing how they're talking.
Right.
And a lot of it is because the way we talk on the internet in 2021 is primarily through like text. Like it hasn't really evolved that much, shockingly. Like it's kind of the same as it was 20 years ago. Like we're sending text messages to each other. There's no face or like emotions or anything attached. You can use emojis, but then you look like, kind of weird.
Right.
Depending on the context. So it's really not a very human interaction no matter what. And it's not really going to be like a one-to-one connection ever.
Right.
Like on a lot of platforms, the way I've always described Reddit is it kind of feels like everyone in the comments, it's like you're all in a comedy club and each person who's speaking gets their moment in front of the mic for like 3 seconds, right? And everyone reacts. You get cheers, upvotes, or boos, downvotes, and then the next person reacts, right? Like it's kind of like this weird, super fast-paced open mic night. No. So, you can't really take it. Like, imagine yourself in that scenario. Would you really take it personally if people booed? Not really. It's just the crowd reacting,
Right.
based on what you said. Maybe you said something that rubbed them wrong, but you can learn from it, right? If you were to sit there and go to open mic night every night, like I did for years going to the League of Legends subreddit.
Oh my God.
You start to pick out what works and what doesn't, right?
Right.
You become a bit of a comedian. So, like, I think you remind yourself it's not personal. You try to deliver value somehow. Like that's what really makes you feel like you're doing something that matters if you can deliver value. So the way you do it as a comms person is you go and you help figure out the problem, how to articulate the problem, and then you bring that information back out to people so that they can tell each other and hopefully everybody understands the situation a little better as a result. If you can do that, if you can help people be understood in a difficult or chaotic situation, if you can go out there and be the face and take some punches for them, but help them be understood, that's valuable, and it feels good to do something valuable. All right, like I'm on the marketing side. I don't create the product, right? I don't create the thing that people are there for. You're not there for me. You're there to play the game.
Right.
I think the people making the game, they want to be able to put that out into the world without being afraid about being misunderstood. So if I can help keep them from being misunderstood, that's sublime. It matters and it helps, right? So I think that's one way. The other way, the way that I would say is like kind of a little bit riskier is like I like to go out there and tango. I like to go kind of scrap and shit post and have a good time. Recently, there was one where we put out some message. I think I did some thread on Twitter, and a few people took it the wrong way, and there were some Reddit threads about it. And one guy in particular was like, F this guy, right? Like,
Right.
he's screw him in particular.
Right.
And so I came in the thread and I was just like, hey, go kick rocks, bro. Which is one, a very outdated insult, which makes it funny because it just doesn't make sense. No one says that to each other anymore.
Right.
So people thought that was funny. And then, we kind of had a back and forth and kind of dunking on each other. But it was funny to see a $1 billion corporate representative come out and just kind of have fun. Because I wasn't mad, I was just kind of lightheartedly kind of flinging poo back at him. The gorillas love it when you fling poo back at them. They do. So I don't really recommend that approach to most people because it can go very wrong very quickly. But I personally have a blast doing it. It makes me feel alive to kind of get in there and scrap with folks. But I like whatever. I like the memes. I like going into like the weird subculture communities and like figuring out what they're about. Like there's an Apex Legends one that is like, I think, entirely a parody of the other Apex Legends subreddit.
Okay.
I won't say the name, but they know who they are. And It's just fun to get in there and kind of figure out like the deep subcultures and things. Just start having conversations on a different level than what would be like the main hub of the community, which is just very different tones. Anyway, yeah. So I have fun. I like to talk to players on the internet, even the crazy ones, because I think there's a way you can kind of put on a Bugs Bunny hat and have fun, even if everybody's throwing poo at you. Yeah. So it's a fun gig. I'm glad I'm not really doing it professionally anymore. Like now that I'm a marketing director, I don't plan on being the face as much anymore. But
right.
But I've definitely learned I've learned something fun about human nature and like how people act when in a crowd and how you can engage with a crowd that is really angry. That's kind of a rare experience. I mean, for most people, they would like to never do that in their
right.
If they can avoid it. But when you get to do it day after day for years on end, like you learn something from that. It's fun. Anyway, I think I answered your question, but
yeah, no, you did, and it that whole part right there goes back to something I learned a long time ago as an umpire. People are not mad at you specifically; they're mad at the shirt. They're mad at what you represent, and I think it speaks directly to the strength of you in the position and your character when you can take that frustration, that outrage, that anger, and sort of guide it and direct it in a fashion to where you end up getting those people sort of I'm on your side. Like you said, when you have the gorillas throwing poo at you, throw it back, see what happens. It doesn't work 100% of the time, and it takes a very nuanced understanding of being able to know what to say and how to say it in a certain context. And it also speaks directly to your ability to cultivate the community in a fashion where they will essentially do your job for you, where those people will advocate for you. They will help other people understand what you actually mean for something. Like, hey, that's not what that says. Here's what this happens. Here's why he's saying it this way. And then you basically have the community policing itself. Which
in the internet era, everyone has their own channel. Everyone is a broadcast station. And so I think the core of any communication strategy has to be, how will you arm your advocates? Because there are people out there who are open to hearing what you have to say and who are willing to share it, right? And they won't share it if they think it's bullshit. If they think that you're lying or that your explanation is inadequate or just doesn't make sense, they're not going to share it.
Right.
So it's there is a positive pressure on companies, on really anyone out there to be open and honest and say, here's what's happening, right? And if you can figure out a breakdown, like bullet point, here's the situation very clearly, people advocate for you. And to me, that is something, like, I call it arming your advocates. I say it constantly. Like, I don't really know any other way to communicate at this point, because if you say something that people can't run with, that people are like, I don't know what to do with this, it's too good. It's like a 10-page thing. Maybe some of them will dig through it. Like, you're not going to get the message out there. It won't get replicated in the network. Like, we don't have big megaphones really anymore. Like, we're all plugged into these networks where people have to repost, share, rearticulate.
Right.
Maybe, and it's not always about algorithms too. They get off Twitter and then their friend is like, hey, what happened? Is Apex down? And they're like, yeah, this XYZ happened. This is going to be fixed by Tuesday, they said. Right. Like that, word of mouth is still influenced by this stuff. So you have to consider, you have to be honest and you have to be very clear, because there are enough people in the network that will spread the message for you that it'll work. People will hear what you have to say.
Yes, it will. All right. So you've worked at EA, you've worked at Riot, you've worked at Respawn. What was the moment in your job at Respawn where you're like, you know what? It's time for me to move on. It's time for me to go from this great game. I had a great time, good team, good people. we had some crisis, we had some fun, and now I'm going to go to a completely different studio in a completely different role.
Yeah, I think the main thing is Odyssey is actually started by some guys that I know from Riot.
Okay.
And I love them to death. Like, these are really good people. And they're smart people. And I think they're gonna win. Like, I think they're making something really good. And I mean, I would love to work with them. So they gave me the opportunity, to head marketing for them. And I'm all about it. So It's something I kind of wanted to do too, that shift to kind of broader marketing. I feel like I've been doing this thing of being the intermediary between very large game communities and game companies. I've been doing that for like a while now. Like, it's been like 6 years. And I feel like I've learned for now, at this stage of my life, I'm only 30, but at this stage of my life, I feel like I've learned what I'm capable of learning from that experience, that very particular experience. And maybe one day and I'll probably still be doing some of it. Let's be honest. It's a small studio, so we don't have a PR head. So I'm going to wind up doing some of that. But I think I'm interested in learning and growing in different ways too. So Odyssey, great team, great people, really great opportunity that's like different for me. So it just makes sense. And like I said publicly about leaving Respawn, like, this is a team that's going to keep winning. Like, they're going to keep succeeding either way.
Right.
Just watch. Yeah, so I'm excited about the future, and very, very glad to have had that opportunity, certainly, because I learned so much from it. Respawn in particular, it's a great team, man. I learned a lot from those guys.
Okay, and now for the most important question of the entire interview, and this is the most important question. How about your spouse? How about your kids? How about that through all of this? I mean, you're 30. You have a kid and you're helping manage the community of a global game. And then you're like moving on and you're changing jobs and roles. And I'm sure that you come home at night and the last thing you want to do is, I don't want to give the kid a bath tonight. I'm really tired. I just want to crawl into bed and pull the covers over my head, right?
Yeah, there's been some nights like that. Usually you'd be kind of surprised. Like, if you set up your communications strategy and style to be one where you do take breaks,
right?
You can kind of create your own hours that way. And so I feel like I actually had pretty good hours, at all the places I worked.
Got it.
There have been times, right, where it was like, the thing is still broken and will be fixed later tonight. We need someone on. And in that case, it's really good to have backup. I had a really great team at Respawn. Wasn't just me in the communications, right?
Right.
There's a few other people, one in particular that we really had each other's backs and would kind of swap off. And so that stuff helps a lot. And was really important.
So, Ryan, thank you very much for making time for me. This was a really fantastic conversation to hear about your hear about the process by which you manage communication. You've moved onto Odyssey, and all that information you see right there on the overlay, the brand new overlay I got made just for this interview. I had to step up my game. Brand new overlay. Ryan, you can see Ryan's information right there. You can follow him on Twitter. Check out Odyssey Interactive on Twitter. Ryan, you're a fabulous human for me. I can time for me to thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it, man.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Please do like, share, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out GBIRL.com. You'll find the audio versions of some of these podcasts. I know I haven't posted there in a bit, but don't worry, more good content on the way. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in today. You can find links to everyone on the show in the description below. Check out Bill the Conqueror on Twitch and Twitter to stay up to date on his thoughts and ideas about gaming culture.